Birshus, Chavra Miyatzes Gedeli Atayra, Chashav Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbanim, Maran, and Rabbi Say. I'm Shlomo Soroka, Director of Government Affairs for Agudas Yisrael of Illinois. And as this year's convention chairman, I'd like to welcome you to the first, and hopefully the last, virtual Agudah convention. This year, we are unfortunately missing one of the most important components of an Agudah convention, the actual asifa of the klal, the physical gathering, the kedusha that emanates from such an asifa, the palpable energy it brings, and the authenticity of Messiah without any technology-based medium is absent. The last big asifa that we had, the Siyum HaShas, was something that taught us an important takeaway, that we learned from that Maimed, more importantly than being physically together, is being on the same page, literally. Torah is what always has united us throughout the millennia and will continue to keep us bound as an Agudah Achas. Over the course of this convention, we will seek and we will receive clarity, direction, inspiration from Gedolei Yisrael, from Chashav Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbanim, and Manhigim. Times change, new situations arise, but the Torah is eternal. It was precisely about these times that the Heilige Novominsker Rebbe wrote, Dafka Achshav, the time is now. That concept became the theme of this year's convention. This message is part of the famous teaching of Hillel, as the Mishnah says in Avos, Im ein ani li mili, ukeshani la'atzmi mo'ani, v'im lo achshav emasai. Hillel begins by telling us that we tend to underestimate our individual abilities to be an agent of change and to make a real difference. Said Hillel, Im ein ani li mili. It's dafka you. Don't think it's up to someone who's bigger, smarter, even holier. Hashem gave you special kaichas, and he wants you specifically to rise to the occasion. The Torah relates in this week's Sedra how Rachel Imenu observed her sister Leah bear children while she remained barren for many years. She came to Yaakov Avinu and she said, Havali banim ve'im ayin mesa anaychi. Your mother conceived because of your father's tefillas. I need you to do the same for me and daven to the Rabbeinu Shalom. My very life depends upon it. Yaakov Avinu responded, Hasachas elikim anaychi asher mana mimech pribaten. As Rashi explains, Yaakov essentially told her, my father had no children, and therefore he davened and his tefillas were answered. I, on the other hand, I have children. This is not my problem. This is your problem. It's hard to understand why Yaakov would say something that seems so insensitive. Did he not feel compelled to daven for his wife's unfortunate plight? Did he not feel her pain? Did he not know the story of Rav Aryeh Levin, who famously said to the doctor, my wife's foot hurts us? If it's her problem, it's his problem. Perhaps we can explain that, of course, both Yaakov and Rachel were davening, beseeching Hashem that they should be zeichet to bear children, the same way Yitzchak and Rivka did just a generation earlier. We know that Hashem ultimately was makabel the tefillas of Yitzchak, who was at Tzaddik ben Tzaddik. So Rachel was telling Yaakov, I'm a Bas Rasha, but you're at Tzaddik ben Tzaddik. If Hashem isn't being makabel our tefillas, it's because you aren't davening hard enough. So Yaakov replied by telling her that Hashem is not looking for the tefillas of a Tzaddik ben Tzaddik. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking for your tefillas. Yafa tefillas ha'choyle mitfilas acher malav. Don't underestimate your importance. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking for your tefillas, for you. He was teaching Rachel, Im ein ani li mili. This is up to you. Chana too was barren for many decades. Her epic tefillah that served as a model for the ages came only after her husband Elkanah tried to appease her and help her find happiness and fulfillment through means other than being a mother. The Mefarshim explain that it was only then that she realized that Elkanah had given up and that it was up to her alone to storm the heavens. Hillel continues, and he says, Ukesha'ani la'atzmi mo'ani. It's not enough to realize Im ein ani li mili. Even if you realize you have indispensable tchunas hanefesh, if you only focus on yourself, it's for naught. Hashem put each of us here as part of Klal Yisrael, and we have an achrayus to the Klal. And finally, Hillel says, Ve'im lo yachshav emasai. Don't wait for that big moment to come. Why? Because the time is now, and the moment is here. The concept of Davka Achshav was the final message of the Novominsker Rebbe to Klal Yisrael. He was weak. He was burdened with other obligations. There were surely others he felt that were capable of drafting a letter of chizuk, but he understood his role, and he felt an achrayus to muster his last ounces of strength. Ve'im lo achshav emasai. Shema lo tipana. Who could have known that only hours after the release of that letter, his neshama would return to its place before the Kisei HaKavod? This really encapsulates the essence of Agudas Yisrael and everything that we do. Recognizing the uniqueness of every single individual, that we must unite as one with a sense of achrayus and achdus under the banner of Torah and the guidance of Das Torah. That is what we are all about. I had the privilege to experience this modus operandi of Agudah firsthand. We had in Chicago an opportunity to engage a high-profile politician in a scenario where the stakes were sky high. But there were concerns about if and how to proceed. So I called Reb Chaim David, who in turn conferenced in the Rebbe Zatzal and other members of the Mayetzes. And after some robust conversation, it was decided that we should engage, but with certain guidelines. The question then came up, how to respond to a request by this political figure to visit the community on Shabbos. Again, we consulted Das Torah, and the maskana was to graciously host, but with a few caveats, including a request to maintain the spirit of Shabbos by not allowing any photography, no photos. It was one of the most uncomfortable asks I have ever made. If you ever hosted a politician, you know that the photo op is the most important part. No photos, it didn't happen. I was afraid of being disrespectful and misunderstood. I was concerned about sounding unreasonable and ungrateful. But we followed Das Torah, not our comfort level thermometers. So I made my awkward request, and lo and behold, I was assured that all conditions would be met. And instead of experiencing the backlash I was so nervous about, the opposite occurred. It was a real Kiddush Hashem, and the team that came was extremely respectful. They didn't even sneak in a picture with a smartphone. And we earned their respect and trust by demonstrating that we stand by our values even when it's inconvenient. The very close working relationship that we enjoy today is not despite following Das Torah, but rather because of it. This is something that I and all my colleagues at Agudah aspire to every single day. Many, perhaps most of the females that I come into contact with in the Illinois state capitol know that I avoid shaking hands with the opposite gender, but inevitably it always comes up. March 5th was the first time I spent the day there, and not once did I have a woman who extended a hand towards me. I felt I made it. Everyone here finally knows me and knows my religious customs, no more uncomfortable situations, no more explanations. I made it. And that was until I saw Bob and proudly stuck out my hand to him, and he politely declined, citing concerns over something called coronavirus. And so it continues. Whatever comes at us, every single day brings new challenges and new questions. We constantly seek hadracha on all that we're involved with, and time and again, our successes are attributable to our fidelity to Torah and our fealty to Das Torah.